I had always believed that a family's foundation, its real foundation, was built from the small, nearly invisible gestures no one outside the house ever saw. The way my husband, Daniel, used to rest his hand lightly on my back when guests arrived, quietly steadying me as if the world needed to know where home truly was. The way my daughter, Mara, brushed her hair behind her ear when she was nervous and looked to me before making any decision, big or small. The way my father-in-law, stern as he could be, always passed me the first slice of roast during Sunday dinners because, in his words, I was the heart of the house. These things were not grand acts, yet they were the threads that held us together. So when I first felt one of those threads tighten strangely, I thought I was imagining it. It felt too soft, too subtle, too unthreatening to be the beginning of anything dangerous. Her name was Elise. I remember the exact moment she entered our lives, though no one else seemed to mark it as significant. She appeared on our doorstep like a misplaced parcel, Daniel's cousin's widow, newly bereft, looking delicate enough to dissolve in the breeze. Her smile trembled when she greeted us, and her voice cracked when she said she had nowhere else to turn. I supposed then that compassion was the right response. I stepped aside, allowed her into our home, and did not realize I was giving her a map to the entire layout of my life. She hugged me too tightly that first night, whispering thank you with a kind of breathless relief that did not feel like gratitude so much as possession. In those early weeks, she floated through our home as though her sorrow made her untouchable. Everyone was gentle with her, patient with her silences, indulgent with her tentative smiles. Daniel offered her his old office as a temporary bedroom, and his concern for her seemed natural enough at first. She was, after all, family. But something about the way she lingered at the kitchen door each morning, watching me make breakfast, felt like she was studying me. I told myself grief did strange things to a person's focus. One evening, I found her seated at our dining table long after everyone else had gone to bed. Moonlight streaked across her face, softening her features into something almost childlike. She looked up at me with eyes too wide, too aware. "You're so lucky," she murmured. "You have all of this. A real home, a real family." I smiled politely and offered her tea, but she waved it away. "You must know how rare it is, what you have." Her gaze traveled over the framed photos on the wall, me, Daniel, Mara, arranged in chronological constellations of our life together. "Some people never get to feel something that secure." I thanked her, unsure what else to do. It felt like a compliment wrapped around a question I could not yet decipher. Gradually, she wove herself into our days with a quiet persistence that made it difficult to object. She insisted on helping in the kitchen, insisted on driving Mara to practice, insisted on doing small errands for Daniel. Every offer seemed generous, every gesture bordered on selflessness. And yet, something in her eyes remained fixed and calculating, as though she were taking inventory rather than assisting. Her grief softened at a suspicious pace. Within a month she was laughing too loudly, leaning too comfortably into conversations, speaking of our home as though it were hers as well. "We should repaint the dining room," she said once, glancing at me as though waiting for permission to continue. "The color doesn't suit the light. Daniel, don't you think so?" And Daniel, who never cared much about decor, simply shrugged and told her she could experiment with samples. The slight, nearly imperceptible sting I felt then was embarrassing, like jealousy I was too mature to admit. But it wasn't jealousy, not really, it was recognition. She had begun to test the walls, pressing against them to see which parts were strongest and which might give way. Then came the moment that stripped away all pretense. I returned home one afternoon to find her in the living room with Daniel and my father-in-law, her voice lilting through the space like she belonged at the center of it. They were laughing in that open, unguarded way our family had shared for years, and Elise was holding one of our old photo albums, flipping through it as though she were revisiting her own memories. "Oh, here she is," she said brightly when she noticed me. "You were so different back then." She tapped a picture of me holding Mara as a baby, my hair a tangled mess, my smile exhausted but real. "You look softer. Life changes us, doesn't it?" Daniel shot her an uneasy look, but she didn't retract the comment. Instead, She snapped the album shut and set it on the coffee table with an air of finality that made my skin prickle. Later that night, when I confronted Daniel, he dismissed it with a weary sigh. She didn't mean anything by it, Clara. She's still adjusting. Don't take everything so personally. Don't take everything so personally. I heard those words echoing for days. They clung to me like damp fabric. I wondered if he realized how eagerly she inserted herself into the empty spaces between us, spaces we had spent years carefully closing. I wondered if he noticed how she began to anticipate his preferences, how he liked his shirts folded, how he took his coffee, how he sighed just before deciding something he didn't want to admit. But of course he didn't notice. That was the magic of Elise. She performed attentiveness like an art form, offering just enough devotion to make a person feel increasingly, quietly dependent. One afternoon, I overheard her in the kitchen with my daughter. "You know," she said in a tone sugary enough to rot the air, "your mother works so hard. It must be difficult for her to balance everything. If you ever need anything, I'm here." Sometimes it helps to have another woman around. Another woman. As though I were merely one of two options. When I stepped into the room, Mara gave me a confused, searching look, but Elise only smiled sweetly. "We were just talking about how strong you are," she said. "Your daughter is lucky to have such a capable mother. Capable, not loving, not present, not essential, just capable." It was a compliment crafted to feel like an evaluation. And I knew then, with a clarity that stopped my breath, that she was not here to be sheltered. She was here to replace me, piece by piece, in every role I held in this family. I began watching her more carefully after that. Every move she made, every word she uttered, every seemingly innocent gesture that struck too deeply or landed too smoothly. What unsettled me most was how everyone around her softened, how they interpreted her eagerness as gratitude, her overfamiliarity as affection. She was building alliances in slow, careful layers, weaving herself into places I once occupied without question. But I did not confront her. Not yet. Revenge, if it was to mean anything, required patience. And I had more patience than she could ever imagine. I learned to quiet my footsteps around her, to let her believe she moved unnoticed through the house she was gradually reshaping. From the outside, nothing appeared to change. The kitchen smelled the same each morning. Mara's laughter still drifted down the hall. Daniel still kissed my cheek before leaving for work. But the equilibrium was shifting. Elise had begun to inhabit a version of our life that excluded me by degrees so slight they might have seemed accidental to anyone less attuned than I was. The first unmistakable shift came one evening when Daniel arrived home late. I had waited for him, dinner still warm in the oven. When he walked through the door, he wore the expression of someone who'd already been fed. Calm, content, slightly drowsy from a full stomach. I asked if everything was all right, and he said, "Elise made a huge pot of stew. She insisted I try some before leaving her friend's place. It was good, really good." He said it with a note of surprise, almost admiration, as though culinary competence were a rare, cherished trait. I smiled and told him I was glad he'd eaten, even though the untouched table behind me made my throat tighten. Later, after he went to shower, I opened the pot I'd prepared and stared at the carefully arranged meal. I could have cried, but tears would have felt like surrender. So I poured the food into containers, placed them neatly in the fridge, and told myself this was simply data. Evidence collected. Proof of strategy. The second shift happened a few days later, during a small gathering at our home. My father-in-law had come early, as he always did, settling in his favorite chair near the window. He had been distant with me for weeks, though I had tried to convince myself it was my imagination. That evening, his coolness sharpened into something unmistakable. When Elise walked into the room wearing an apron, my apron, tied neatly at her waist, he looked at her with a fondness I had not seen him direct at anyone in years. "You're a godsend," he told her. This house needed some fresh energy. I felt the words strike me like a physical blow. Fresh energy, as though my presence had grown stale. Elise turned to me with a helpless, modest shrug. "He exaggerates. I'm just trying to help." But her eyes gleamed with a quiet triumph she didn't bother to hide. I kept my tone steady. You don't need to take on so much, Elise. You're a guest, not staff. Her smile barely twitched. Guests earn their keep in different ways. My father-in-law chuckled, not understanding the undercurrent. You two are quite the pair. A pair, as though she and I shared equal footing in this house. After everyone left, I attempted to address the situation with Daniel. I kept my words measured, careful. She's overstepping. Anyone can see it. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my gaze. She's trying to cope. She lost everything, Clara. If she feels useful, let her feel useful. She's not just feeling useful, I said softly. She's positioning herself. He frowned, irritated. You're reading malice into kindness. She adores you. She talks about how much you've done for her. I almost laughed. Adored me? No. Elise studied me the way a gardener studies weeds, mapping what needed to be trimmed, uprooted, replaced. But Maria's footsteps echoed down the hall then, and I didn't want the conversation spilling into the night where it could poison everything further. So I let it go, outwardly at least. Inside, a plan began to crystallize. But before plans can be built, a person must first understand the enemy. And Elise began revealing her true colors faster than I could have anticipated. One afternoon, I came home unexpectedly early and found her in the lounge with a stack of envelopes, mail, opened and sorted into piles. Bank statements, insurance documents, utility bills. She glanced up only when she sensed my presence. Oh, she said lightly, I thought you were busy today. I was going through everything because some of it looked overdue. They weren't overdue, I replied evenly. They were scheduled. She offered a bright, dismissive laugh. Well, now they're organized. You're welcome. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You don't open other people's mail. She tilted her head, her expression slipping into something colder. Someone has to keep this household from falling behind. The implication lodged between us, sharp as glass. I held her gaze. This household has functioned perfectly well for years. Yes, she said, her smile returning like a blade sheathed. And yet, here I am. The air thickened between us. She had dropped the facade, if only for a moment, revealing a glimpse of the ambition beneath. She wanted control. More than that, she wanted my life, piece by piece, gift-wrapped in vulnerability and carelessness. I walked away before I said something I could not take back. But my calm retreat was not retreat at all, it was strategy. I needed to understand the breadth of her reach before I moved. I needed to know exactly how far she had pushed herself into the cracks of our family's structure. The answer came sooner than I expected. The following weekend, Mara mentioned casually that she preferred the way Aunt Elise braided her hair because she does it the old-fashioned way, not rushed like you do. She said it without malice, without awareness, but the words pierced me. They carried Elise's fingerprints all over them. And then Daniel began taking Elise's suggestions before mine. Small things, inconsequential things, yet symbolic. A change in the grocery list. A different route to Mara's school. A new arrangement for the living room furniture. Each shift felt like a piece of me being overridden. I was disappearing in my own home. But disappearing can be a powerful advantage, too. When no one sees you, they do not see you watching. And when they do not see you watching, they reveal themselves freely. One night, while the house slept, I stood in the doorway to the spare room that had once been Daniel's office. Elise lay curled on the bed, the glow of her phone illuminating her face. She was reading something, messages, perhaps, but it was not the content that caught my attention. It was the expression. Calculating, amused, victorious. She believed she was winning. She believed no one could stop her. She believed I was unraveling. But Elise did not understand that a woman pushed aside is not a woman defeated. She was mistaking silence for surrender. She was mistaking restraint for weakness. And as I watched her there, basking in her quiet triumph, a calm certainty washed over me. She had orchestrated her ascent skillfully. But she had overlooked one crucial truth. No one knows a family's pressure points better than the woman who built the home. And I was done letting her tear it apart. I would take everything back. I would reclaim every inch she had stolen. But I would do it softly, invisibly, the same way she had moved against me. And when the moment came, she would not even realize she'd lost until the ground beneath her gave way. I began with nothing more dramatic than observation, deliberate, disciplined observation. I mapped her habits, her preferred tactics, the subtle ways she nudged others into believing she was indispensable. She relied heavily on impressions, the illusion of competence, the performance of warmth, the curated vulnerability that made people eager to defend her. People remembered feelings more than facts, and Elise crafted feelings with surgical precision. But illusions have one weakness: they collapse when exposed to the right light. My opportunity arrived quietly, on a day so ordinary it felt almost scripted. Daniel had left early for a client meeting. My father-in-law was visiting his sister. Mara was on a school trip. The house was silent except for the distant hum of the dishwasher cycling through its final rinse. Elise came downstairs wearing one of my sweaters, soft gray wool that still held my shape. She didn't ask permission. She never asked anymore. "Busy today?" she asked, voice bright as polished metal. "Very," I replied. She nodded, satisfied, and drifted toward the pantry, her new command center, judging by the way she'd rearranged it without consulting me. I watched her place a small box on the highest shelf, slide something behind a row of jars, and then close the door quickly, as though hiding a secret. When she left the kitchen, I opened the pantry. The box contained receipts, carefully folded, sorted, documented. Not her receipts. Ours. Where we shopped. What we spent. What she could eventually claim we'd mismanaged, should she ever decide to paint me as incompetent. Behind the jars, I found a notebook filled with neat handwriting detailing household routines. When bills were paid, when groceries were delivered, when Mara needed to be picked up. It was a dossier on my life, arranged with administrative devotion. She wasn't improvising. She was preparing. I felt a calmness settle over me, not fear, not anger, clarity. She was building a case to replace me. And cases can be dismantled. I replaced everything exactly as she'd left it. I closed the pantry. I waited. My plan required patience, subtlety, and a perfect understanding of her vanity. Elise believed she was the smartest person in the room. She believed she could steer perception effortlessly. So I gave her room to perform, room to overreach, room to expose herself. The unraveling began a week later. I invited my father-in-law to dinner, not a grand affair, just a quiet meal, something warm and familiar. Elise, eager to display her competence, insisted on handling the cooking. "It will be a relief for you," she said sweetly. "You've been run ragged." I agreed, because agreement was the trap she never recognized. While she prepared the meal, I watched her from the doorway. She whisked, chopped, seasoned with theatrical patience. She spoke brightly, filling the kitchen with chatter. But she never noticed that I swapped the labels on 2 spice jars earlier. Harmless ones, nothing that would make the dish inedible, only enough to alter the expected flavor noticeably. Enough for someone like my father-in-law, who prized consistency, to question the source. When dinner was served, he took one bite and frowned. "This isn't how this dish is supposed to taste." Elise blinked, confused. I followed the exact recipe. He took another bite, grimacing. "It's wrong. Clara, you usually make this." "What happened?" I kept my expression neutral. Elise insisted on helping. My father-in-law set down his fork. "You don't need to experiment. If something works, don't fix it." His tone was sharper than I expected. Elise's cheeks flushed. She murmured an apology, her voice tight. It was small, insignificant, perhaps, but Elise relied on unbroken success. A flaw in her facade was a fissure she didn't know how to mend. The next fracture came when I, accidentally, left my phone on the counter with the family calendar open. A few entries had been subtly adjusted, times Elise had altered without telling me, thinking I wouldn't notice. I knew she would see it. I knew she would panic slightly at the thought I might accuse her. And I knew she would attempt to fix it covertly. When she reached for my phone, thinking I'd walked away, I stepped back into the kitchen. She froze. She began checking my calendar. I finished for her, my voice steady. Her eyes darted away. It looked off. I wanted to help. You've been helping a great deal. The way I said it made her stiffen. Her instincts told her something was wrong. But Elise was too deep into her narrative to pull out gracefully. That evening, I set the final piece of my plan in motion. I gathered the family in the living room. Daniel sat on the couch, exhausted from work. Mara curled up beside him. My father-in-law settled slowly into his chair. Elise entered last, wearing an expression that hovered between suspicion and confidence. I found something today, I began. Elise's eyes sharpened. I placed the pantry notebook on the coffee table. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What's this? A record, I said. Of everything Elise has managed in the house. Bills, routines, receipts, schedules, even notes on how we make certain meals. My father-in-law frowned deeply. Why would she need all that? Elise stepped forward quickly. I only wrote those things down to help Clara. I thought she was overwhelmed. I looked at her directly. Were you helping me, or preparing to take over? She flinched, just slightly, but enough for everyone to see. Daniel's gaze shifted toward her, confusion giving way to something colder. Why are our bank statements in here? Why are you tracking everything? I wasn't tracking, she insisted. I was organizing, but her voice wavered, confidence cracking. I opened the box of receipts. Then explain these, or the changes you made to the calendar without telling anyone, or the way you've been making decisions for the household. Silence pooled thickly in the room. My father-in-law spoke first, unexpectedly firm. You've overstepped, Elise. This is not your place. She looked at him in disbelief, then at Daniel, waiting for him to defend her. He didn't. He only said, quietly, you should have talked to us. This feels manipulative. Manipulative. The word hit her harder than any accusation I could have voiced. Elise tried one last time, desperation rising. I only wanted to be part of the family. And you are, I replied. But being part of it doesn't mean replacing its members. Those words landed with finality. She looked around the room and found no ally. No anchor. She had built her influence on impressions, but impressions crumble when exposed to motive. That night, she packed her things without speaking. When she passed me in the hallway, she paused, searching my face for something, anger, triumph, scorn. But I gave her none of that. Only truth. You shouldn't try to take what someone else has built, I said softly. It will never stand. Her jaw tightened. She left without another word. In the days that followed, the house settled into itself again, like a body exhaling after holding tension too long. Daniel apologized more than once for not seeing what she was doing. My father-in-law became warmer, protective even. Mara leaned into me again, trusting the familiar rhythms she had briefly questioned. Life resumed, not perfectly, but honestly. I did not celebrate Elise's departure. I did not gloat. That was never the point. Revenge, when crafted carefully, is not about destruction. It is about restoration. And I restored my place, not by force, not by cruelty, but by letting Elise reveal who she truly was. She tried to replace me. But a woman who knows the architecture of her own life cannot be replaced. Not then. Not ever.